If you are a CEO or you lead a team and your team has to deliver presentations or slide decks or they have to give speeches, but they're not doing a good job or you don't think they're as good as they could be, I'm going to break down why that's the case and what you can do about it. We work with many tech firms and tech companies, and most of the people who are delivering presentations are technical people who are really good at their craft. They're really passionate about the work they do, but the moment you ask them, hey, can you present your findings to the rest of the team, to the clients, present it at this conference coming up, all of a sudden, they don't know how to do that. Why? Very simple, because they just have not been trained. You see, many people who have an occupation that requires them to be behind the computer or not be very social, when you all of a sudden now put them in front of an audience, they don't know how to perform simply because they don't have that skill set yet. Now, what do people do to fix this problem? I'll tell you, in my experience, we've coached more than 20,000 people at this point with workshops, with coaching, with courses, you name it. The vast majority of companies have nothing, no training whatsoever. So what they do is they say, hey, you've done this thing, right? Why don't you go talk about this thing? The challenge tends to be, many of these people, they don't know how to prepare. We've seen people list out and script every single word over a 30, 40, 60-minute presentation and just reading it. Can you imagine what that would sound like? You're trying to get the audience excited about a product. You have slides you're sharing, and when you speak, it sounds like this. Hey everyone, welcome. We are really excited. I want to introduce this person. And first, we're going to talk about the product. Then we're going to talk about that. It doesn't matter how good your product is, how good your service is. If you're reading from a script, if you're unprepared, if people can tell you're nervous, the whole thing will fall flat. So imagine you've gone out, and this is a real case, you've gone out, gotten a new client. The client comes in, and now you get to present in front of them, trying to start off the relationship well, and then you deliver a dud of a presentation. It's going to affect the onboarding. It's going to affect how the client feels about you and their expected experience. Because what happens is the first experience we have usually dictates our expectations for the rest of it. If you go to a restaurant and the appetizer is terrible, you're not going to have high hopes for the main course or the dessert. In the same way, when you're presenting your product, especially before the client has bought, they're going to have expectations in line with that presentation. So if your presentation sucks, if your speech sucks, if the people that are representing your company don't do a good job, it's going to have a big effect on your bottom line. So we talked about why people are not doing well in their presentations. We talked about how they have no training. Now, some companies, they do have training, which is great. But here's the problem with the training. This is what they do. They say, okay, we need to train our employees on presentation skills and public speaking skills. Let's find 1 day or 2 days maximum. We'll bring in some presenter. We'll do a 2-day crash course on all the tips and tricks on how to become a better public speaker. They will give you tips about what to put in the slides, how to speak confidently, how to use gestures, all of the basic foundations of public speaking. And then after the workshop's over, everyone feels like, wow, this is amazing. I learned so much. This was life-changing. And a week later, nothing changes. Everything is exactly where it was because other things happen. People go back to work. They don't practice it. So yes, for those 2 days, we felt a little bit better, but then we stopped doing it for the rest of the year. So let me ask you this. If you wanted to get better at playing the guitar and you played the guitar rigorously for 2 days out of the year, and then you never touched it after that, how much better would you get? Not very good. And this is why we see so many corporate training, so much of it just falls flat because there's no consistency with any sort of skill development. You need consistent exposure and consistent practice. So once the workshop is done, the trainer can say, hey, I brought in a trainer. Or the manager can say, I arranged a training for my employees. You got trained, didn't you? How come you're not doing well? Well, because I got trained for 2 days. 2 days. And most of that also, by the way, is them just listening and taking notes. There's no application. We've also seen training where, let's say you're a remote company and all of your presentations are done over Zoom and most of the stuff that you talk about is over slide deck. We'll see a public speaking coach come in and talk about how you should use broad body language and how you should utilize the stage. You should talk loudly and this is how you make eye contact. These people aren't getting on a stage They're not going to talk to anyone in person. They're only doing it remotely. So the issue with a lot of this training tends to be it is not customized to the audience and it's not customized to the context. So can you imagine if I attended one of these training and it said, talk louder, use broader language, and now I'm sitting in a boardroom with clients and I say, today I'm really excited to present to you 2 things that our product can do. I'll look like an absolute idiot. So contextual training is very important. Consistent training is also very important, and also understanding what every individual person needs in the company. So let's say you've got 10 people on a team and they do this type of presentation to this type of client and they talk about this subject. The training should revolve around those things because now it is contextual. Now, of course, you can broaden this out depending on the size of the team, but the broader you get, the more fluff enters the training. So if I just came and did a how to be a better public speaker, people might say, oh, that was useful, and then they have no idea what to do. So people are not being trained. When they are being trained, the training is very short, happens very infrequently, and it is not consistent, and there's no measure. There's no measure of success. Once we've done the training, how do we know it's working? When you go to the gym, for a month, you look in the mirror, you step on the scale, you know something is changing. If nothing is changing, maybe I should change my diet. Maybe I should change my workout. But we don't do the same thing with public speaking and presentation training. How do we approach this differently? I'm going to give you 2 answers. One is you do it yourself, and the other is you bring somebody in. Let's say you're a CEO and you want to do this yourself. There is an element of safety that must be introduced. So if you have somebody who does a presentation, and in front of the whole team, you say, oh, that's terrible, that was horrendous, they're not going to enjoy that experience. In fact, you're going to traumatize them from doing it again. So if you see somebody doing a presentation, the first thing you want to do in private, give them feedback around the presentation. And I will tell you this from my clients, I'll tell you, almost none of them get any feedback. They don't get feedback on their slides, they don't get feedback on how the presentation went, and they certainly don't get any feedback from the clients about how they felt. Because if the presentation is bad, they're not going to say it's bad, they're just not going to ask any questions. How many times have you been in a presentation where you talk for an hour or you listen to someone for an hour and at the end they said, any questions? Not a peep. Oh yeah, that was pretty good. We'll get back together, we'll discuss, and we'll shoot you an email, we'll let you know. If they had interest, they would ask questions. If they're confused, they will not ask questions. So you have to give them feedback, and you have to give them feedback as soon as possible. You don't want them to do 50 presentations and then you say, actually, Sam, we're going to give it to Jennifer instead because whenever you do it, you do X, Y, Z. Well, Sam didn't even know that because no one gave them the perspective. So let's break this down. The first thing we must do when we prepare the slides, especially if they're slides that you're going to be presenting consistently, you can prepare them one time, get feedback from the team. Hey, what do you think of the slide deck? Make sure it looks good. And it is a slide deck for presentations, not as a manual. Many companies do this. They say, prepare a slide deck so I can send it to the client. That's different. That's a manual. You don't present a manual. Those are 2 very different things. So slides should be to aid your presentations. A manual is something you can send over afterwards. So have 2 different versions of that. So you run the slides by your team and they give you feedback on the slides. Great. Slides are settled. Let's say it out loud. Now you gather together with one person from your team, another person from your team, and you say the words out loud, maybe parts of it, or maybe start to finish, depending on the length of the presentation, and then you get feedback. Hey, what did you think about the flow of it? Were you able to follow? Did it get confusing at any point? Is there any point that you think I could have enhanced? Was I loud enough? Could you hear me? Was it boring? You get that feedback because when you ask them for specifics, they give you specific answers. So if you did a presentation, you said, how'd it go? They would say, yeah, it went pretty well. That's most people's feedback. They don't really know how to give feedback. But if you say, hey, out of my presentation, was I loud enough? Yeah, you were loud enough. Okay. Did you feel like I was looking away too much? No. You're looking away just fine. Did you feel like start to finish, it was easy to follow? Actually, point number 2 was a little confusing. You went into some statistics and I didn't understand that. Okay. Now you're getting specific feedback on specific areas of your presentation. This is crucial because now you can see the blind spots. You know what the issue is. So you worked on the content, you've reviewed that with your team. Then you deliver. You get feedback from the team. So now, get this. By the time you get to the client, when it really counts, you know your content is good. You know your delivery is good enough that people on your team like it, you take that confidence with you to the meetings. So many people, especially in working in tech or working in fields that don't have a lot of interaction with the audience, you get nervous because you don't have a lot of social skills or you haven't worked on your public speaking. But when you know for a fact that your slides are good, when you know you've gotten feedback that your presentation is good and your speaking skills are good, when you then speak to the client or when you then speak in a conference, you have that confidence because you know it's good. You've gotten proof and evidence in the past that it is a good presentation. But here's what most people do. If you have a conference coming up or you have a presentation coming up, most people will make the slides a day before, some of them even on the day, some of them hours or minutes before the presentation. They will never say the words out loud. So when they do say it in the presentation, they're stumbling and it's almost like they're discovering the presentation at the same time as the client. And this can be so subtle, but it makes a huge difference. Check this out. Imagine I'm delivering a presentation. I say, so today we're going to talk about our product. Next slide. And then we're going to talk about this. Next slide. Here we're going to talk. Can you see how unprepared and unprofessional that looks? Simply because I'm discovering what's on the slide for the first time myself, or I'm saying the words out loud for the first time myself. So it doesn't sound very good. That's like Taylor Swift is about to go on stage in front of 100,000 people, and backstage she writes a song on a napkin and decides to go out in front of 80,000, 100,000 people and just decide to sing it. Now, she's an amazing public speaker, she's an amazing singer, but she's not going to do well compared to other songs because she doesn't know what the rhymes are like, she doesn't know what it sounds like, where to go up, where to go down, how to coordinate with the music. Same way, if you don't rehearse out loud, you don't know when to transition, you don't know when to add Q&As, you don't know what to emphasize, you don't know if there's too much text. So you want to make sure both the content and the delivery, you've said the words out loud. I recommend at least 10 times before you go into a client presentation, especially if it's a presentation you'll do many, many times. I was working with a client of mine. She delivers technical AI-based presentations, and she's an amazing public speaker as is. And she was delivering this AI presentation to clients, and we went over it, and she did great. She did a great job. But as I heard her speaking, I realized, hey, need a bit of a story here. It's a little too technical. This part that you talked about, it was very confusing for me because I don't have an AI background. I imagine many of the people you're talking to, they might not have an AI background. Some of the stories, you skimmed right past them. I didn't really feel the emotion. So even if you're an amazing public speaker, just running it by someone makes a huge difference. So that's if you choose to do it yourself. Review it yourself. The other way you can do it, and this is what we do for companies. Companies hire us to come in, work with their teams, and identify individual traits that their teams could develop. So let's say I was working with a very renowned tech firm in the data observability space. We had 4 people, same exact job, but their personality types were very different. One of the people, when he would present, amazing, sounds fantastic, but when he would speak, he had this tendency of constantly playing with his fingers. So he would be like, yeah, today we're very, very excited. We're going to talk about this, talk about that. And so even though what he's saying is correct, he sounds confident, it's physically distracting. Physically, I can see that he's nervous because he's constantly doing this. The other person had an entire script. So they were just reading it out loud. And of course, we know the problem with that is, we talked about it earlier, it sounds robotic. And we don't want it to sound robotic. So what I had them do is, instead of reading the entire thing, I asked them, hey, do you know this material? Not word for word, but these points that you're talking about, do you know them? I said, yeah. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to read out the title of point number 1. Just talk about that. I'm going to read point number 2. Just talk about that. And I did. And for 5.5 minutes, they went off the top of their head, talked about it naturally because they knew the material. But because they were so afraid, they felt like, if I forget, I need to have a script. But the problem is, when you have a script, you're so reliant on it that you can't talk about the things that you know about. So it's a weird cyclical effect. So we see individual traits in people, and then we custom tailor our coaching to them. We say, hey, you work on this, you work on that, you work on that, and we give them a tailored plan. A lot like if you want to get in shape, a trainer gives you a diet plan, a trainer gives you a workout plan, and all you have to do is follow that. And then every 30 days or every 2 months or so, we check in. Hey, have you been following the schedule? Are you getting better? Are you seeing the difference? We measure in video performance. They record themselves speaking and they record themselves speaking again. They put it side by side. This is how you improve. And guess what happens? When they start to see that initial progress, they want to do more because now they believe they're getting better, they feel more confident, they're getting compliments from their boss, and the client loves the presentations. So this is the type of work we do. If you're interested in hiring me or my team, you can go to speaklikeaceo.com and you can apply to work with us there. Now, to round this off, problem is most employees don't know how to do presentation training because they've never been trained to do it. And because they don't know how to do it, you're probably losing quite a bit of revenue because of crappy presentation, because of not being able to read the audience in the room. How many times have you seen the audience completely check out of a presentation, but the presenter just keeps going on and on and on and on, even though nobody's listening? Not being able to confidently answer the Q&A. I've seen many people crush the 30 minutes, and then the moment we get to Q&A, now that they're not rehearsed, everything goes in the can. So you also need to know how to speak on the spot. How do you do it yourself? You train them by giving them feedback as soon as they present, the closest you can, and in private. You also get them to rehearse out loud before they go on stage and make sure they're doing it. Most employees will not do it. So make sure they have time on the calendar to rehearse it out loud. Get the slides checked so they get some confidence that the material that they're presenting is good. Slides and a manual that you send the client are two different things. Remember that. Because when you have a manual, you have tons of information on there that they can go through in their own time. Whereas slides are meant as visual aids. Hey, this is what I'm talking about. Now look at me. Now pay attention to what I'm saying. So you don't want to make a manual in your presentation. This is a big mistake we see all the time. But if you do want to accelerate the results, what I would offer you to do is go to my team, go to speaklikeaceo.com and hire professionals to come into your team and train them to be professional presenters, and you will be shocked how quickly you see a difference and how much more confident your team feels.